Awesome. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook Live and YouTube. As always, if you guys can follow our YouTube channel, that does help us a little bit now as well. So we had a couple of good topics brought up today, good questions. One of the questions asked was about settlement. Okay, so one thing that you may have noticed when TD Ameritrade was officially purchased by Charles Schwab, they made a little bit of a change. So whenever you sell an investment, so let's say we got Steve over here and he sells his investment to me and I buy it, we then exchange money, right? Well, back before electronic transactions, there'd be a stock certificate, right? So Steve would have a stock certificate, I'd have a check, and they go in the mail and they would settle. But now, over time, things keep getting faster, quicker. So one of the big benefits, now, and obviously, why do banks exist? They exist to what? To make money, right? Okay. And so one of the things about TD Ameritrade is they did not make as much money as Charles Schwab, so they were purchased by Charles Schwab. And so one of the things TD Ameritrade did that I always liked is if you requested money from me and you said sell an investment, I could basically send that money immediately. So even though that money had not technically settled yet, TD Ameritrade knows that they're going to have the money in the account, so they went ahead and they would what? Send it. And then if you didn't pay, who would they come after? Me. If there's something went wrong, it'd be on me. Well, Schwab, just like Wells Fargo, we used to hold our money, and a previous firm that I used to work for, they don't let anyone send money out of their account until it officially settles, till the money's officially there. And so one of the big challenges we've had as a company is, in the past, if Linda over there says, hey, I want a check, we sell it, we send it. It gets done right when? Immediately. Now we got to sell it and remember a few days later to what? Send it. So we've got a system in place. Well, right now, because the Federal Reserve is paying so much money every day, almost 5% interest, to hold that money overnight, it's not very profitable for the companies to send you money quickly, right? Because they get to what? They get to make interest on it. And banks exist to make money. And so one of the things that happened, and to my knowledge, which is limited on this, is the only company I've ever worked for that would allow us to send the money immediately was TD Ameritrade. Wells Fargo, Edward Jones, who I previously worked with, Charles Schwab, of course, all those companies, they require settlement because they want to make money on your money. That's their job. And so that's one of the changes. Yes, Steve?
Sorry to interrupt. So as we go through the process here, I'm looking at a term called Fed funds.
Yeah.
Is that our money transitioning into that? Is that Fed funds?
So Fed funds is basically where a bank like Charles Schwab or Wells Fargo or a local bank here, they put your money overnight so they can make interest on it, right? And so right now, the federal funds, they raised that interest rate to make it more attractive for banks to leave the money there than to loan it out in the economy to slow down the economy. Because they can get 5% overnight, why do they risk loaning money to Bill to buy a car when they can get 5% with no risk? And so that's what the Federal Reserve does. So as the Federal Reserve has raised that rate, it's encouraging more and more financial institutions to hold on to your money longer because they get paid more interest. Now, the second part of that is, next year, the government's going to move settlement, I believe, from 3 days to 2 days in May. The Federal Reserve has also been testing out what's called immediate transfer of funds. So the Fed is in the process of, if you say you want money sent from your bank at the credit union, let's say you do business with Ascend, and you want your money to go to Capstar, instead of that taking a day to show up where they put it overnight, the Fed's been testing it where it's what? Immediate. which means you won't have to do wires anymore because the money can be sent immediate, which means the threat of that money being stolen is going to do what? It's going to way diminish. It's also a direct threat to Bitcoin because one of the reasons people like Bitcoin and blockchain is because you have an immediate transfer. And so what the Federal Reserve is doing is they want to control more of the money supply. And when they can do that, they'll have a lot more power because money will move what? Instantly. But also it means the banks can't park their money there and earn money on your interest being slow. Because a lot of these rules go back to when we were mailing things, not when we were doing things digitally. So obviously things should speed up because everything has gotten a heck of a lot faster than it was 100 years ago. Right? That's what settlement is. But so a lot of people love the fact that TD and Ameritrade in the past would send the money immediately. But that actually is not legally what they're supposed to do per the law. Per the law, they're supposed to wait to send the money till it settles. But that is one thing that did see a change. It's funny, they didn't tell us before the merger that was going to happen. So I remember we were sitting there like, what? The money's not going out right now? We got to wait till it settles. And it's not because they did it on purpose. It's because everybody else does it the way Charles Schwab does it. So they didn't think about it. I really feel like that's a lot of it. They just didn't realize. I think that's really the big thing. Of course, another part of that is if we send your money right away and the money's not there, they're going to come after me for the money. Not you, they're going to come after me. Here, Charles Schwab's saying the money's held with us. Nobody can go after anybody because the money's going to be there till it's available. But great question, Steve. Oops. Okay. If you notice this whiteboard moving, you can thank Hayden because he put it together and he missed a couple pieces right here. And so every time we're on this board, it moves a little bit when it shouldn't be moving. So I get mad at you every time I do that, Hayden. Look at it. We can tell. I'm just kidding. Anyway, a couple of fun facts. December derives its name from the Latin word decem, meaning 10, because it was originally the 10th month of the year. I did not realize that December was the 10th month of the year, and I guess March was the first month of the year, and so they started the whole calendar different. It kind of tells you how big of a deal Jesus or the Christian or the Christmas pagan holiday was originally, because you think about when all the German tribes came in, they did it the way we do it, and then they adopted it, so it's kind of changed over times. Warren Buffett's investment partner, Charlie Munger, passed away. I don't know if you guys saw that. On November 28th at the age of 99. He was kind of Warren Buffett's a little bit more well-known, but Munger was with him for a long time. And he's a little bit more of an edge to his quotes. So I thought it was kind of good with him passing to mention some of his quotes. I figure that I want to swim as well as I can against the tides. I'm not trying to predict the tides. And if you think about that, it's really important because when we look at investments or we look at portfolios and you say, well, how well am I doing? If you're like, well, the stock market went up 20% every year for 5 years in a row and you only made 10%, you're not doing very well. If the stock market went down for 5 straight years and you just lost a little bit of money, you're doing what? Pretty well, because you can only do so much with the tides. And that's really, if you think about it right now, the market hit its high since the last high in January of 2021 yesterday. And so it's been over now. We're going on almost our 24th month since we've had a new high in the stock market. So that's one thing to factor in. It's not, usually it takes 17 months roughly for a new high to happen. So we're a little bit overdue. The world is not driven by greed. It's driven by envy of your neighbor. Thought that was kind of interesting. It really is true. It's like I was swimming at the rec center this morning, and they had, first time ever, they'd put up plaques for the 3 kids that had gotten scholarships from the Mako swim team. And so, well, I think those plaques are saying, well, we're proud of those people, but now those other people want to what? outdo them. I want to do better than them. And I really, if you think about it, that really kind of is kind of the American experience is, I want to do better than my parents did. I want to do better than this friend at school. I always remember there's a guy that my dad was always competing for the highest GPA in high school. And I met him for the first time this year. And he knew exactly what my father was, because I guess they were both competing on the GPA, and he even kind of mentioned it. And this has been something I heard as a kid when I was 12 years old. So this is 28 years ago, and this is going on 40 years ago. So it's just kind of funny to meet him, which I won't mention his name in case he's watching. Good investing requires a weird combination of patience and aggression, and not many people have it, because you got to be real patient, and then you got to be able to act quickly when it makes sense. Understanding both the power of compound return and the difficulty in getting it is the heart and soul of understanding a lot of things. Forget who I was talking to yesterday about in life, it doesn't matter how much money you make, it comes down to how much money you save. I've seen many people that make $1 million a year that can't live on that. And people that make $20,000 a year that can still save money. And so it's always been funny. Obviously, we have people that work at the office and are like, well, I just don't make enough money. That's never the case. Because what you'll find is the more money you make, the more money you'll spend. If you can't make it on what you're making now, you're probably not going to make it if you get much of a raise. And that's always the funny part about money. Of course, they usually get mad at me when I say it to them. But anyway, we had a couple things, and we can start whatever order you guys would like. If you have any questions, that's great. There's an interesting thing that's been occurring with annuities locally that is something to be aware of. We don't sell a lot of annuities here because I don't love them, but there's a real weird thing. They found a new way to take your money. The Federal Reserve, of course, is meeting tomorrow, and then what's in store for 2024. Whenever you hear the word annuities, who gets a warm and fuzzy feeling? Not very many people, right? So I think it's for a good reason. And obviously, an annuity may be appropriate for some people to buy. Generally speaking, the reasons why I don't like annuities is the first thing is they're very complex. If I can't easily understand what it is, I don't love it. I'm a simple person. If you got 1,000 bells and whistles, it's much harder to understand. It's kind of like, I got a different car and it's got a little bit more stuff on it. I finally got it to where it's just, I'm not using everything. I'm just using the simple stuff. I want to get in the car. I want to listen to some music. I want to be able to listen to Bloomberg Live. That's it. That's all I really listen to. So it's not very complex. As long as my sound is working and my phone's working for Bluetooth, I'm pretty happy. And so that's kind of the thing here. Annuities are not that way. The other big thing is I've never been in an insurance company before. So I would not expect to as an investment. And I think you're unlikely to as an investor. Remember, when they're structuring these contracts, they're structuring it so the insurance company's what? You might have noticed, insurance business right now is a terrible business because the insurance companies are losing billions and billions of dollars right now. Why are they losing so much money? Anybody know? There's lots more disasters than they anticipate. Some of these hurricanes that have hit these really expensive homes in Florida. Bluntly, you can understand why an insurance company would say, we don't really want to insure an island off the coast of Florida. Right? Because if you ever look at the map, the height level is like what? We're about this far over sea level. The whole state. If you see a mountain, it's probably a landfill. Right? So that's a big thing. Also, car insurance. Car insurance is tough because a lot of the car values have gone up a lot, but they didn't raise your insurance premiums enough to cover the more expensive cars. I don't know if most people don't realize this. Insurance companies typically don't make money on the premium. They make money on the investment. See, when a lot of these insurance companies, they buy what's called bonds, which we're going to do a podcast on that today with Brian. is if you're locked in at 3% for 30 years and the rates go to 5%, you've lost about 30, 40% of your money. Well, guess what those insurance companies invested a lot of their money in? These bonds. So not only they lost money now on the cars and on the houses, they've lost a ton of money in their investments. So guess what they're going to do now? You're going to raise your premium. And so you can be like, well, I hate that insurance company. But also, guess what gets to happen for you? Everyone loses money. Everybody pays. This is another nasty thing with inflation, right? Is inflation just keeps on hitting back hard. You know? Just another little nasty part of it. One thing I don't like about variable annuities and equity index annuities, and just so you guys know, the most sold annuity in Manchester, Tennessee, in my experience, it was called an equity indexed annuity. When I started my career, it was a variable annuity. This one right here is the most commonly sold. I guarantee you, if you have a friend that does business anywhere else but here, they probably own one of these products. They probably own that product right there. Our three biggest competitors locally put about a third to 40% of all their customers in this product right here. You know, that's the most common product. Okay, so another thing to be aware of with this product right here in general is they don't really say what they're charging. They always put it this way. It's included in the... Now, here's the thing, right? If you go to buy your car and the guy says it's included in your monthly payment, that's a problem, right? You need to ask the question of what? This is why I don't finance cars. If you see me a car right now, I wrote a check for it because I want to know what it costs. If you write a check, you know what it costs. Okay. So a lot of companies out there that used to sell annuities, older, my favorite one, and hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying this publicly, was this company called Hartford Life Insurance. Anybody ever heard of Hartford? So one of the things I loved about the Hartford is they made this statement. You know, in the Civil War, we insured Robert E. Lee's house when it burned down, and we paid out, which is pretty cool, right? You know, you got to think about Robert E. Lee, right? Here he is, the general of the Southern Army, and where does he get insurance from? Well, just in case everything goes bad, I'm going to get my insurance in Connecticut. You know? And the one thing that really helped Hartford is, did the Southerners burn down Connecticut? No, but they sure did a mess at his house, right? It's not a mess, it's Arlington Cemetery. But the point is his wife's house. But his other house, they did burn down. And so, the end of the day, most of the really successful companies that sold insurance, sold annuities, after 2008, they stopped selling them. Why? Because they say if everything goes bad, they're going to have your money insured. Then when everything goes bad, what do you figure out? You can't insure money. If you think you can insure money, open your Bible up and see what happened to the Jewish people in the first 10 tribes of Israel. Or the 2 tribes of Judea, Judah. Did they have their money? Did the Assyrians and the Babylonians say, "Ha, you can keep it"? Now remember the king of, they took his sons, they took his eyes out? They didn't say get to keep your money. And so if you look at one people in history, and especially people that are pretty good at money, the Jewish people don't really try to, they do have a lot of money, generally speaking, but they tend to put more time and money into what? Skills they can take with them. Because you can be a doctor anywhere. You could be a lawyer anywhere. You could be an accountant anywhere. You could be an engineer anywhere. That's why they focus on education so much, in my opinion, because they're smart. They understand how it works, right? And so when we're looking at most Hartford, MetLife, John Hancock, all those companies used to offer annuities. When 2008 hit, they all stopped offering them because they weren't making money, and they what? So almost every company that sells an annuity today, they're typically not, they've not been a successful company very long. So let's just give you an example here. So let's say, I love the St. Louis Cardinals, and so Logan had a shirt on yesterday that said, St. Louis Cardinals established in 1892. And that's true, but they really didn't win their first World Series till the 20s. So the Cardinals really got good, what? About 30 years later. And baseball, I don't know what it was like back then, but I'm betting it wasn't what it is today where they're paying $700 million for one guy to play baseball. Right? So remember the baseball players had to have side jobs to play baseball? Now a guy's getting $700 million. He's getting like $400,000 a game. That's nuts, right? So if I wanted to say that McCay Wealth Advisory was older than 2011, what could I do? I could find some investment firm somewhere out there that was established in 1800 and said, hey, we've been around since 1800s. Was that really true? Not really, because we didn't, I always remember a company I used to work for, they would always claim they were, 150-year-old company. They still do. But the reality is it was a one-person office for the first 120 years, So it's a little bit misleading. And so annuity companies are doing the same thing. A lot of the companies you hear of today, they're really relatively new companies when it comes to the thing, which means they've not gone through a crisis. They've not gone through problems, right? And that's really important because when you think about managing money and money in general, it's not the good times you get hurt in, it's the what? The bad times. And that's what matters. Okay. So let me talk about how these are sold. How would you like to have a product where you can't lose money if the market goes down? If the market goes up, you can make money, and we're going to give you a bonus up front when you buy it. Who wants that? Does it sound pretty good? I don't know. That sounds really good.
I live there.
Yeah. And I guarantee you, if you open your mailbox, you get a lunch invitation to these right here. No doubt about it. They're selling them all the time. They're very common. This is the most commonly sold investment in 37355, this zip code. The most commonly sold investment in Tennessee. Okay? So here's a couple things to keep in mind. Just some things they don't say. So they go in 5, 10, 12, possibly even 15-year terms. Now, what this means is you can't access all your money for 5, 10, 12, or 15 years. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I retire, and let's say I'm retiring at 70, I don't really want to buy a 15-year annuity because personally, at 85, I'm probably not going to be moving very fast. Just going to be honest, right? So that's what you're looking at there. Okay. Now, they have they've got a pretty big upfront commission. Typically speaking, the longer you lock in, the more money the advisor gets paid up front. And what we found in practice is, if it's a 5-year, it's usually 5% up front. If it's a 10-year, if it's a 12, it's a 15. This is not always true, but it is generally true. Now, think about this. Here's a great question. So how hard is it to get an insurance license in Tennessee to sell this? How long does it take you? What do you guys think? What is the entry requirement to get your insurance license in Tennessee? How much training you got to do? How much training you got to do, Bill? A week. How long did I say? Did he say? A week. 1 week. And you can sell this. Okay? Now, what we have found out, most of the people that sell them, they don't stay in business long. So what? They get the commission, then they're gone, right? You never see them again. Sorry. Didn't mean to throw it that way. Okay. Now here's how they actually work. So they have what's called a daily, monthly, or annual cap. So let's say you bought the S&P 500. Everybody know what that is? The 500 largest companies in the United States. That means, let's say you're capped out at 4%. So this year, the S&P is up almost 21%. And so that means if the S&P does 21, the insurance company gets 17%, and you get 4. Okay? That's how it works. There's no fees, but they just get your... Okay. And remember, when you're doing a 10-year contract, which is the most common, it's very hard for the markets typically don't drop for 10 straight years, right? Typically they go up. So if the S&P does a negative 5%, you don't lose any money. So you're locked in, but you don't make any what? Money. Okay. Now, they also allow you to pull out 10% a year, typically, penalty-free. Which means if you had $100,000 in there, you could pull $10,000 out each year penalty-free. If that makes sense. Now, we've had a new... What this actually is the insurance company, let's say we got Robin back there, and let's say she had $100,000. So she puts $100,000 in an equity index annuity. They go out and buy a 10-year bond. Okay? And right now, let's say that 10-year bond is paying 6% interest. So they go take Robin's money. They put $100,000 at 6%. They then say, Robin, you're going to get a guaranteed 4% a year. Or you can go out and do the S&P option. And once a year, you get to change the option. Because when it comes due, they take some of your interest that you would have earned on that bond, and they go and buy a stock option in the S&P, or in the Dow, or the NASDAQ. And so basically how it works is if you pick the fixed option, they get a guaranteed what? 2%. If you pick the S&P option, they use your interest and they get 2% minimum plus whatever the S&P option does above the cap. So can they lose? No. The only way they can lose is if you pull out your money early and the bonds have gone what? Down. So this is what they just recently did. They're now in these contracts saying, they're not calling it a penalty, they're calling it an interest rate adjustment. So we had a customer who bought a $200,000 policy from a local institution here that you guys would all know. And we looked at the statement, and now it says it's worth $120,000 because it has had an interest rate adjustment. If he holds the policy and never pulls a penny of his own money out for 10 years, he'll get his money back. But most people don't go into retirement with the idea that they're never going to use any of their money for the first 10 years of their retirement. And what's very interesting is for the first time in my career, they have this little exclusion there that says interest rate adjustment. Now, about a third to 40% of every dollar, in my opinion, invested in 37355 has just had interest rate adjustment. And so even though we don't do these here, we don't recommend them at all. It's something to be aware of because the insurance company really can't lose. If the bond goes down in value, they just charge it to you. If the stock market goes up, They get the majority of the money. If you want a fixed fund, they get the spread. If the insurance company gets in trouble and they start going near bankruptcy, they call the government and say, hey, we need a bailout. Right? I mean, you guys don't realize this, but we actually paid in that last budget bill $100 billion to shore up FDIC for those 3 banks in California. Did you guys hear what I said? We actually wrote a check here in Tennessee for those 3 banks in California for FDIC. $100 billion budget item. Right? So that's something to factor in. But that's kind of how it works here. I know this is different than we normally talk about. The only reason why we brought this up today is 30 to 40%. We don't have a single one of these policies in our books here at our office, but 30 to 40% of every product sold in Manchester, Tennessee is this. And you can't win. You can win a little bit, but who's definitely going to win? The insurance company and the person selling the product. You know, that. Anyway, anybody have questions about this? I know we don't do products. I know. Sorry, it's a little different. Okay. Let's talk about more fun stuff. See, Hayden, every time this board moves. For Christmas, Hayden, you give me a new board and fix it. Just kidding. Okay. Okay. So, the next big thing here is, so we all know the Federal Reserve is going to meet tomorrow. Well, they're actually meeting right now, sorry. They're meeting today. Tomorrow they'll talk, sorry. And so what we're seeing is inflation has really slowed down inside of the United States. If you look at the numbers that came out today, inflation was right at basically almost 0% or 0.1. It's basically growing at a 3% rate. Historically, when I started my career, the Federal Reserve just wanted inflation to be between 2 and 4%. The new Federal Reserve says 2%, but historically it was always, we just want to be between 2 and 4. So if the Federal Reserve was to look at this report, how they looked at stuff 20 years ago, they would say, oh, we're back to normal. And all you got to do is if you look at a couple key things, you'll notice that things are kind of back to normal. Go to look at a car lot, right? If you guys look at car lots right now, what do you see? You see cars. Since COVID, when they shut down the factories for COVID and everybody went home and started buying cars, they which is really smart, right? Nissan, we're not going to make any cars right now, and everybody's going to go home. And so when people go home, as Americans, it's not like it was back in the day, right? You couldn't go. You go to Macy's in person. Now you just pull up your phone. And you're like, I really want me a new car. I'm just sitting home all the time. I'm getting paid to sit at home. So what am I going to do? I'm going to buy a car, and nobody's making cars. One of the dumbest moves companies could make. So car lots are getting full again, which means that I just bought a car for $12,000 below dealer invoice, where most cars were selling for what? Above dealer invoice. Now they're discounting cars, which shows you the economy is what? It's slowed down. Restaurant traffic. So if you look at restaurants, it's really interesting. If you look at the chart, right when COVID hits, restaurants do this, and then as soon as they reopen, they go straight up. Because everybody couldn't go out to eat. So when they said you could go back out to eat, what did everybody start doing? It's always funny because you think about, not to get a lot of biblical references today, but you're like, hey, you guys can go to the Garden of Eden. You just can't eat one thing. And so what's the first thing people want to do? I wonder what it tastes like. And the same thing with you look at habits. Oh, you can't go out to eat. As soon as they reopen, I'm going to go out to eat. And so restaurant traffic, which was at a 20-year peak in 2021, has now become negative for the first time since COVID reopened. So now less people are going to restaurants. And I can tell you, I go out to lunch about every day. You can see that there's less people at O'Charlie's. There's less people at the restaurants. You're seeing less people out eating. You're seeing less Christmas parties too. You're definitely seeing that in the numbers. Another big one is U.S. Tire Manufacturer Association. So there's these little things called semi-trucks. You guys ever heard of them? And there's this little factory pretty close here called Bridgestone, and they make tires for trucks. Yeah, trucks and buses. So whenever the economy slows down, what does that factory normally do? They're the first one to slow down, because if you stop buying stuff, trucks stop shipping it, you need less tires. And so U.S. Tire Manufacturers Association has lowered truck tire shipments. So last year they sold 325,400,000 units. This year, they're estimated to sell 325 million. Last year they sold 332 million. So for the first time since COVID, the truck shipments are down. Now there's something called the Dow Transports. You guys are familiar with that? So a lot of people, when they look at the stock market, they look at companies in the transportation industry and say they're the first ones to show a recession. And so what's really telling about the Dow Transports is back in October, when the market was at its lower level for the year, it actually went negative for the year, which meant a recession was probably what? Imminent. And then just since October, it's up 18.54% in the last about 6 to 8 weeks.
How does the strike fit into that part, the auto strike? Is that what?
For trucks, not very much, Darla. Now, it does affect cars, because General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler had certain cars that they couldn't sell. So it did, in this report that just came out this morning, which is a good question, this morning the report showed that there was some certain types of cars, because they only struck at certain plants. Like they struck, I think Ford, it was mainly the F-150 plant. And so there was a bunch of F-150s which were selling over price because they couldn't get them. You know, it was funny, the way they did that strike, you know, it baffles me, because Tesla's making cars for $25,000 a car. And Ford's making those, Chrysler and Ford, those Wagoneers and the Expeditions, those cost about 80 grand to make. Think about that, right? Eventually Ford's going bankrupt. Eventually Chrysler's going bankrupt. Because when your competitor can make a car for $25,000, that doesn't include the battery. So the battery, which lithium prices have dropped like crazy. But when they can make a car that cheap and you're making your cars that expensive, it's only a matter of time till you got a business. So striking then doesn't make a lot of sense, because all you're going to do is losing your job. But that's their call. They've been making that call for a long time. And so that could have a little bit of role. Maybe they weren't shipping as many cars, but it's very clear that like they're planning on doing a big expansion in Warren County at the Bridgestone plant. I want to bet you that they'll probably slow it down, maybe cancel it again. Yeah, because you look at it and you say to yourself, if they're not selling tires, they don't need that expansion. Which is why it's so important when you look at local government. If you don't jump on stuff quickly and say yes, the economy can move on you. And these big companies, they'll stop those expansions if it doesn't move forward. Another one is consumer credit, what people borrow on credit cards. It's at an all-time high, but if you look at the chart from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, it's like this, and then that's what's going now. People are not they're not borrowing as much money right now, or they weren't last month, because they were concerned about a recession. Median home prices. So if you look at a home, the fourth quarter of last year, the median, which is the typical blended average of homes sold, was $479,500 last year. I always loved it. Like back when home prices were really hitting high last year, I saw all these real estate agents who are like, "Oh, this time's different. Homes can't go down." And one of them is just like, "Oh my God!" And you just look at them like, really, you got to be stupid to actually put that out publicly, because that's, so the median home price this year has dropped to $431,000. Almost a 10% drop. So if you think real estate hasn't gone down, just drive around and see how fast houses are selling. They've slowed down considerably. But it makes sense, right? If your house payment goes up, $1,500, $15,000 a year because of interest rates, unless you got a $15,000 raise, you're probably not buying that house. The other thing that's interesting is inflation is probably back at 4%, or maybe even be 3%. Now, what's also been interesting is interest rates are now going down, but oil is also dropping like crazy. And what's weird is gold is going up. So it's a very weird situation. Now, one of the things that, this is just my opinion, is interest rates are going down because people feel like the Federal Reserve is not going to raise rates ever again this cycle. We'll see tomorrow. The market believes, some people think in March they'll start cutting rates. Bill Ackerman said that publicly last week. Oil is dropping because the rest of the world is in a small recession, so they aren't using as much oil. And I really thought gold's going up because of China. If you look at the biggest buyers of gold are China and India. And if you guys have noticed, China has put complete capital controls on all your money. You can't get your money out of the country. So if you can't do that, what do? You start buying gold. Because here's the thing, if I can't take my money and get out of the country, maybe I can go in the country and convert it into gold and then walk it out. Right? It's kind of heavy to walk it out though, right? I've never held gold bars, but I'm assuming they're pretty heavy. Might be a lot of walking anyway, if it was me walking. But that's, and then also Fox News. Fox News, I feel like they're paid for by gold companies. Because if you watch Fox News, all I hear is, you got to buy gold. You got to buy gold. You got to buy gold. It's the craziest thing ever. It's also a 30 to 40% commission. You can actually, if you want to have some fun, go on Amazon, look at gold coins, and compare gold coin price versus the spot price of gold. And even Amazon's getting a pretty big commission to sell you gold. So I just factor that in on the market. But typically, gold goes up when inflation is going up. It's supposed to go up. Now, it hasn't worked. If you look at gold hit $2,000 an ounce last week. And guess what gold was in 2008? $2,000 an ounce. So yes, it's had a pretty good year, but not a lot of people are saying, hey, I want to invest my money in something that hasn't moved for 15 years. Not a great deal, right? Not a great deal at all. And so, but all this is very interesting, is showing the Federal Reserve has, inflation has definitely cooled down. Now, the irony of all this is whenever things get cheaper, like rates go down, people start spending more what? I always notice it, right? Anytime the market's going up and you guys are making money, I spend more money. Anytime the markets are going down and you guys are losing money, I feel like I'm not going to get to eat this week. Okay? You can just ask Susie, because she's like, you are in a bad mood. Every freaking day the market's, I'm like, yeah, it's not going to change. It's not going to be any different. It's nothing I can do about it. And so when interest rates go down, more people buy cars, more people go buy houses, and you see the opposite. So the Federal Reserve is kind of in a tough situation because they can't really control that as much as they would like. Because the minute rates go down, people start spending money again, so the economy, which is slowing down, starts what? Speeding up, and then inflation starts what? Speeding up. Now, one of the big things that does matter is oil, right? Because since we still import a lot of oil products, when the prices of oil goes down, it does reduce inflation naturally. And so that brings us down to there's this little country out there. If you guys want to know what the fastest growing oil country is in the world? Don't say it, Brian, because you knew. What do you guys think it is? Who's really just killing it? Nobody knows. Guyana. That's right. Guyana. Right here, say it. Probably said it wrong. So this little country a couple years ago is right next to Venezuela. They found the largest oil find offshore ever in the history of the world. And so right now, it's gone online this year. And they're at 620,000 barrels a day right now. And they're expected to be about 1.2 million to 1.4 million very soon. Now, what's interesting is Venezuela, this weekend, had a referendum saying that this country is really part of us. This country is really not Venezuela. Okay? And so then they started moving their army to the border to go ahead and invade. Now, what's interesting about it is Brazil then moved their troops to the border to hit, and then the U.S. is flying planes over that. Now, personally, that doesn't seem like much of a deterrent. I think if you go drop 5,000 Marines in there, they'd be pretty dumb to go across the border. That's a smarter move, and that's the same thing if you look at Ukraine. You know, we could have done the same thing in Ukraine, and I bet Russia never would have come across that border. And so we may see another war starting because we're not making a decision. You know, if we would just go out there and put some people there, Venezuela's not going against U.S. military. Russia might, but Venezuela, it wouldn't take very long to kill them. But it's very interesting because President Biden, who has been very much a big proponent of electric cars and electric vehicles, he is the biggest defender of, because guess what country probably holds a big part of his re-election chances? Because if gas prices are low next November, is anybody going to remember paying $5 a gallon last year for gas? Some people will. Yeah. Some people might. But most people out there are going to just be like, what? Okay, and it's very funny because, you know, with all the money they've spent on electric cars, and I'm not saying I like electric cars personally. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend some money on them. But that being said, it's funny because now the number one U.S. strategic interest is this country. And there's this little country out there. You ever heard of it called Kuwait? And it's a similar situation, right? Remember Saddam Hussein had just had a very expensive war, was in a really bad recession over the Iranian war. And he said, I'll just take this little country, Kuwait, with a few people. And George H.W. Bush was getting ready to run for re-election pretty soon. He didn't want gas prices spiking. And he also had a different view on foreign policy. And so what did the U.S. do? Drop troops down. Now, if you would just drop them in before they invade, they're probably not coming across the border. That's just my opinion. So, you know, if you not trying to get political here, but if they would go ahead and do that right now, we would know that next year. Now, of course, Exxon is the big company that's making the oil. They were going to go green, but they're still making oil. Isn't that weird? And so it's also very interesting, too, because if you look at electric cars are now sitting on the lot for like over 121 days, which means they're not selling. Ford just announced they're slowing their Lightning factory, which sucks for our area because Ford was one of the companies talking about building a factory here in Manchester. So electric cars would have been very positive for Manchester. But what is interesting is hybrid car sales are now up to over 8.5%. So if you look at this electric revolution, one of the big benefits is if you take some of these electric batteries that are getting better and you put them with a gas-powered car, that's a lot better use of money.
And common sense.
Yeah, when you think about, like, so I bought a car, and my car is a hybrid car. So, and I already noticed it. I'm getting 60 miles more a gallon than the previous version I had back years ago. That's 60 miles more for the same amount of gas. And it cost the same price as the car I bought back then. So think about what that does. If every car will get 20 or 30% more mileage, what does that do to oil demand? And so what is going to end up happening is the government spent all this money going all electric, but the market's already said that hybrid is really what works. So guess what's going to happen to, they're going to get what they want. They're going to get less fuel demand because hybrid's going to work. And hybrid does work. Toyota has showed that with Prius. Priuses are good cars, you know. And so that's what you're seeing here. And so that's pretty much the one of the big things with guiding out for the market update. You know, the big question for 2024 is, are we going to hit a recession or not? Well, you think about it, okay. So recessions do sometimes happen during market years, during election years, but not very often. If you think about 2020, economy was growing. We weren't in recession. Pretty good year. 2016, economy was growing. 2012, economy was growing. 2008, the economy was slowing down very quickly, and the party in power lost power, and the other party what? Took it. 2004, pretty good year. 2000 was a slight recession. They got worse as it went on, 1996. But generally speaking, this year's been very interesting. Okay, so there's something out there called, is everybody familiar with the S&P 500? So when you hear that name, what do you guys think of?
The largest 500 in different sectors.
So and you think of, you know, largest companies, also you think of diversification, right?
Right.
But the S&P is not really as diversified as you think, right? Because are all the companies treated equally in the S&P? No, only the biggest companies get the most value, right? So if you look at it, Apple is 7% of the S&P 500. It's the biggest company. So how Apple does, how many iPhones they sell, has a big impact if you own the S&P 500, right? And so this year, we have an investment in your portfolio called IVV if you invest with us. And it's up 20.94% before yesterday. Now there's also this other investment called S&P 500 equal weighted. The concept here is we're going to put the same amount of money in every one of the 502, 503 largest companies in the United States. So Apple's going to get the same amount of weighting as Cracker Barrel or as, you know, Dollar General. Everybody's going to be the same what? Weighting. What's interesting about that is the equal weighted S&P is only up 7% this year, whereas the S&P's up 21%. And that shows you a diverging market. Because if you owned NVIDIA, you might know what NVIDIA is?
It is an AI company.
Yeah, they make artificial intelligence chips. You made a lot of money this year. That is one of the number one stocks for the year. And if you didn't own it, you didn't make very much money this year, right? Because if you own Bank of America, you didn't do very well. But if you own NVIDIA, if you own Microsoft, if you owned these kind of companies, you what? You did very well. And so one of the things we look at portfolios is the equal weighted, the average S&P 500 company is not up very much this year. But these high performers are what? Up a lot. And that's why it's so hard when you're managing money. If you buy a mutual fund where you're paying a manager, the odds are against him or her. Because if only a few companies made all the difference, that means if they didn't buy those companies, you probably didn't what? Probably didn't make much money this year. But if you own them all, whether Microsoft, NVIDIA, or Bank of America make money, if all companies go up, you what? In general, you make money. So that's kind of one of the things that we do here. But if you look at mutual funds, standard mutual funds, where they're managing money, they are one of the big reasons why they're probably going to underperform this year by a lot is because only a few companies represent the whole game. Now, next year, if we don't go into a recession, and a lot of these companies haven't gone up, and they're still trading lower than they were 2 years ago, is it probably a better bet next year? Yeah, it probably is. You know, if if interest rates get more stable, it's going to be easier for banks to make money. Right? Because if they don't know to charge Hayden 10% on a loan or 4% on a loan, it's hard to do business. You know, so that makes a big difference. Interest rates will likely go down next year, would be my guess. If it's Biden versus Trump, which is what the polls would say today, you got to remember, Donald Trump's already said he's going to do a couple things. One of the things he mentioned is he's going to fire everybody in the Federal Reserve. So who do you think of the 9 of them is voting for him? And remember, they affect everything you do. What you pay for stuff, what the interest rate is on what your house is worth, what your investments are worth, what you pay for food. So you think they're going to try to use their power to help themselves? Nah, they're just doing it for fun. It's a hobby. He also said he was going to fire a lot of people that work for the federal government. How many people work for the federal government? Do you guys know? 2.87 million people. Now you take almost 3 million people, add all their family members with them. How do you think they're going to vote? Right? And so right now, if you look at where the economy is now and you say, well, interest rates are probably going to go down. Next year's a pretty good chance. They're probably going to try to make sure gas prices are low. Right? Because there's going to be an election. Now, all these things are good, right? It's just too bad the politicians work that way. Why not try to make gas prices low all the time? Why do you got to do it before the election? Why don't you just make it cheap all the time?
See the economy rolling in.
Yeah. Why manipulate? Just let it go all the time. Go ahead.
Speaking of the Fed and Secretary Yellen, is that her name, Yellen?
She's Treasury Secretary, yeah. But she's not for the Fed, though. She's different
What
division.
do you think they were behind the 8 ball and they were so lost in predicting the recession? They were totally, they were a year behind, I guess you'd say, right? Can you believe that?
Well, and we talked about it, and this is a good question, but we talked about it at Investment Insight actually back in July of 21, is you have 2 different types of main recessions. You have disaster, then you have financial. Disaster is 9/11, right? When 9/11 hits, they kill all those people. Everyone's scared to go outside their house. And then you wake up and realize there aren't that many terrorists here. It's going to be okay. And we're going to blow them all up, right? Then you have like California wildfires. You have Spanish flu. You have COVID. These are disasters that happen, and they're bad short term. But once you come out of your house, everybody starts what? Spending again. So they're not very long term. Like COVID, the economy slowed down for a short period of time, but people were saving all the money. The national savings rate hit 30%. Well, think about it. You put a bunch of Americans, you put a bunch of Darlas at home with 30% more money, what's going to happen to poor Mark's money? It's going to be spent on a lot of decorations, as you guys see right here. They look good, right? Thanks. Yeah. I had to force a compliment, but we'll take it. Anyway, and so what happens is those are disaster-like situations because you're sitting on a lot of money and you're waiting to spend it. So you don't need to stimulate people. All they got to do is just let them do their thing. Let them be Americans. Let them want more money, right? Then you've got financial. 2008, Great Depression. Okay. This is where you go bankrupt. This is where a lot of Americans go bankrupt. What's the problem with bankruptcy besides the fact that you don't have any money? You lose your credit. And unfortunately, in our society, we're a very credit-heavy society. So it's not, okay, can you start a business if you have a 400 credit score? No, because you can't borrow money. And so if you think about housing, right? It's 2008 until 2014, the housing market really didn't recover. But it started recovering in 2015. Why did it start recovering in 2015 so heavily? In 2016? Nope. Nope. There's this little group out there called Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And yeah. And if you get, like my home loan is secured by Freddie Mac. So the Freddie Mac was dumb enough to give me a 30-year home loan at 2.75% interest, right? But guess what happens? Can I get a loan if I file bankruptcy in the last 7 years? No. Wait a minute. You're telling me 2015, 16, the housing market came back? Well, guess what? All those people that had gone bankrupt in 2008, the bankruptcy went off their record, which means they could now what? That's why that recession was so long, because all those people who had defrauded their financial statements, cheated, done all the bad things, now got access again to the credit market. And when that happened, the housing market did what? It boomed. And their challenge is nobody went into construction during that period of time because there's no future there, they thought. All they had to do was wait. Wait till 7 or 8% of the population, where it was, I'm just guessing, it's not something to fact check, that had gone through bankruptcy, now they get off that record, they start what? We had multiple customers who had gone through bankruptcy in 2008. They had money, couldn't get a loan, so they were living in trailers because the only people that would give them a loan is who? Manufactured homes. Nothing wrong with that. That's just how it was. And the minute they that went off their record, what did they do? They bought a bigger house. And the housing market what? Recovered. So a financial crisis is much longer lasting. And so what both Trump and Biden did is they looked at 2008, which was the most recent recession, and they said, COVID's going to look like this. And they got it wrong. Because in a financial crisis like 2008, one of the things you can do is you can find the people and say, hey, why don't we change that rule? If you went through bankruptcy and you do good things for 3 years, we're going to let you get a house again. And they print a bunch of money to get in the market. They did all that. They treated COVID like this when they should have treated COVID like the Spanish flu. Because you remember what happened at the Spanish flu? You guys know why they call it the Spanish flu, right? Where did it come from? Well, how did it get here? Did Spain touch America? There's World War I. All the U.S. soldiers came back from Europe. They came back home and they brought with them. And then 3 to 5% of the United States population died. And then everyone had the roaring 20s. All these young, because it mainly killed younger people. And so all these younger people were dying. And they said, I better live now because tomorrow's not promised. Wait, does that sound like COVID? I better take that trip now because we don't know when they're going to close. And if you actually go back and watch our videos, you can go back to I think it was June or July of 21. And we say, this is how they should have treated it. They should stop spending money. Stop printing money. Because it's not needed. Because all it's going to cause is inflation. And if you look at your statements on the money we manage, we bought inflation hedges on our bonds around that same time period. Because no matter who won that election, whether it was Trump or Biden, they both promised they were going to spend a bunch of money, which was the wrong answer to me. That's my opinion. That's a great question, Steve, but that's totally my opinion. But so far, I would think I'm right. The biggest thing, of course, when we look at next year is uncertainty. If you want to go see Steve, he's at the post office in towards Smart Station. So buy a stamp. He's got to open the post office at noon or 11:30. So uncertainty is the number one thing. The thing that markets really love about elections is when they're over. You know who the winner is. We'll be having 11 months from today or whatever, we'll be having our investment insight of who's going to win the election, because it's always on the second Tuesday. And we'll have the data on what the market is saying. But what the market's really like is, if Trump's president, you know what you're going to get. If Biden's president, you know what you're going to get. So the market really likes these two guys in a lot of ways because they're both what? Very predictable. When Trump first ran for office, he was but now he's very predictable. I mean, think about it. What would be some predictions? If Trump's president, there's going to be a lot of Twitter. There's going to be a lot of talking. There's going to be a lot of, would you please shut up? You know, he's going to want to drill a lot of oil. You know, you already know what he's going to do. If Biden's president, you're going to be like, well, is he really there? You know, what's going on with him? And, you know, who's making the decision? What is the decision? It's like this whole thing with Guyana, right? We talk about Guyana. You're going to fly a plane over the place. That's not scary. Now, you put a bunch of guys that are 18 years old with machine guns, that's scary. You know, I don't want to see that. You know, but I mean, flying a plane over ain't going to do it. So, that being said, for the markets love certainty. If the markets know tomorrow that the Federal Reserve is not going to raise rates anymore, the markets are going to love that. If the markets don't know, they're not going to love it. Most of the time, Jerome Powell talks too much. 92% of the time when he talks, we lose money. So my guess would be what? We know what he's going to do. He's going to, and it was funny is, about 2 weeks ago, he started trying to scare everybody. Everybody started ignoring him. He went out and said, we're going to raise rates, we're going to go crazy. Everybody's like, we don't believe you. Because he talks so much now, he's the boy that what? Cried wolf. And so if you noticed, I don't know what his markets are doing now, but that report that came out today, the markets were kind of blah. They didn't really do much. Because everybody's like, we already know it's... Which is kind of a bad thing and a good thing, because it's good because we're not dependent upon one person, but it's also bad because the Federal Reserve is losing their effectiveness the more they talk. Do you have any questions about this? Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in today, guys. And by the way, Merry Christmas. If I don't see you before now on Christmas. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook. Investment Insights and Educational Space to do our best for accurate information for legal. For your personal, legal, financial, and accounting advice, please seek out your unique situation for making a decision. Thank you.